The Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. 2 Processions. March 2nd, 2025. Lord's Day Service Sermon. Pastor in Cho. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. Good morning everyone. American funerals seem simpler than Korean ones. These days, Korean funerals have become much simpler, but it is said that in rural Korea, funerals are still held by carrying a bier-decorated coffin to the burial site. Money, spoons, bowls, shoes, etc. used by the deceased are hung on the bier painted in various decorations to wish them a safe journey to the afterlife. The bereaved family and mourners follow in a long line as the bier carriers carry the bier on the left and right, and the bier carriers stop every so often, saying that they will not go unless they receive money. A widow living in a village called Nain held a funeral for her only son who died. Verse 12 says, "As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her." The scene of the bier carriers of the dead son going to the cemetery with the mother and the townspeople following behind resemble a Korean funeral where a bier was carried and the people followed. This mother, who was a widow herself, must have felt truly sad because she had lost her only son. Jesus called this dead son a young man, and in Greek, this word refers to a young man under 40 years old, so this son must have been a grown man in his 30s. This son may have earned money to support his widowed mother. The mother, who had no husband, lived solely relying on this son. But then this son died. As the saying goes, when parents die, they are buried in the ground, but when children die, they are buried in the parents' heart, so this mother's sorrow cannot be expressed in words. This mother lived, but in reality, she experienced death. This woman's situation is our situation today. We too can lose our husbands, wives, parents, and children. We can also lose our health and jobs, our businesses can fail, and we can fail exams. We can also be betrayed and wronged by those we trusted. We can also experience sadness, frustration, and death, just like the mother who lost her only son. Therefore, we are included in the funeral procession in today's text. We are the mother who lost her only son, and we are the villagers who also mourns as we follow the bier. Perhaps we are the dead son. In this way, death leads us to sadness and pain. What is death? Why do humans die? If there were no death, we would live forever and would not be separated from our loved ones. If there were no death, we would not experience sadness and pain, and we would not have to hold funerals. If there were no death, children would not have to fight over their parents' property, so why on earth is there death? Every time we attend the funeral of a loved one, we think about the fact that we too will die someday. Why on earth do we die? The world's religions, philosophies, and ideologies only talk about the phenomenon of death, not the cause of death itself. However, the Bible clearly talks about the cause of death. Romans 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all sinned, death came into this world through the sin of one man, Adam. Therefore, the reason why all humans who are descendants of Adam die is because of sin." Whether or not someone believes the Bible, which says that the cause of death is sin, is a matter of human freedom. However, whether someone believes the Bible's answer or not, the results for humans are vastly different. Those who believe the Bible's answer that the cause of death is sin will overcome death by believing the Bible's answer to the solution to death. However, those who do not believe the Bible's answer that the cause of death is sin will also not believe the Bible's answer to the solution to death, and will ultimately face eternal death. The illnesses, separations, and failures that we experience are symptoms of death. However, humans ignore the cause of death and try to solve only the symptoms of death. However, humans can never be happy unless they know the cause of death itself. Therefore, we must first solve the problem of death. How can we solve the problem of death? Since the cause of death is sin, we must first solve the problem of sin to solve the problem of death. How can we solve the problem of sin? First, let's think about Jesus' actions from the perspective of the woman who lost her son. Verse 11 says, "Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him." Verse 13 says, "When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her and he said, 'Don't cry.'" Jesus went to this woman first, saw her, and felt compassion for her. Now let's think about Jesus' actions from the perspective of the dead son. Verse 14 says, "Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, 'Young man, I say to you, get up.'" So Jesus went to the woman first, felt compassion, and also touched the bier of her dead son and told him to get up. What happened then? Verse 15 says, "The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother." Jesus went directly to the woman and her son, and raised the dead son with a word. In this way, Jesus solved the problem of the son's death. However, the fact that Jesus raised the dead was not just an event that showed that he had the power of miracles, but also the power to forgive sins. The miracles Jesus performed were not for the purpose of the miracles themselves. Jesus performed miracles to let people know that he is the Son of God who has the power to forgive human sins and save people from sin. Luke 5:24 says, "But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." So he said to the paralyzed man, "I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home." Jesus not only healed the paralyzed man, but also forgave his sins. The reason the dead son came back to life was because his sins were forgiven first. Therefore, unless the problem of sin is first solved, humans cannot solve the problem of death. However, no human being can solve the problem of sin on their own because all humans died like this son. The dead cannot speak. The dead do not know why they died, and they do not have the ability to come back to life on their own. Even his living mother does not have the ability to save her dead son. This woman is also a weak being who will die someday, so all she can do is follow the bier and cry. However, if Jesus comes to us first, just as he came to the woman and her son, we can solve the problem of sin and death. However, Jesus came to us directly from heaven 2,000 years ago, saw us, touched us, and spoke to us. Then why did Jesus come to us directly? He came to us to die on the cross for our sins of opposing God in Adam. Believing this fact is the solution to sin and death that the Bible speaks of. Some people ask why humans must solve the problem of sin and death. They say that we will all die anyway, whether we solve the problem of sin and death or not, so there is no need to solve the problem of sin and death. In short, whether we believe in Jesus or not, we will all die anyway, so there is no need to believe in Jesus and solve the problem of sin and death. Therefore, they turn away from the problem of human sin and death. This is why the world's religions, philosophies, and ideologies only talk about the phenomenon of death and do not talk about the fundamental cause. However, if we solve the problem of sin and death, there are two benefits. First, we will be resurrected after physical death. This son whom Jesus raised would have died again later. However, Jesus telling him to get up implies a future resurrection. Jesus will surely raise us from the dead. John 11:25 says, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And we who are resurrected will live forever with God in heaven. This is the first benefit of solving the problem of sin and death. The second benefit of solving the problem of sin and death is happiness in this world. Nain means beautiful, happy. Originally, God created humans as beautiful and happy beings, but because of the sin of opposing God, all humans died, and because of that death, they experienced suffering, pain, and unhappiness. Sadness and despair came to the happy city of Nain because of death, but happiness came again. Both the woman who lost her only son and the dead son regained their joy, and everyone in the village was happy. In this way, when we meet Jesus, we regain the joy and happiness we had lost because we fundamentally solved the problem of sin and death. If we have the hope of resurrection by believing in Jesus today, we do not fear death, nor do we fear the symptoms of death, such as disease, pain, and suffering. Disease, pain, and suffering can never take away our joy, happiness, and gratitude. This is because even if we die, we will live again, and our hope is not this world, but heaven, where we will live forever. Through today's text, we can see two types of processions. The first is the funeral procession, and the second is the Jesus procession. Verse 11 says, Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. This procession is the procession of Jesus. What is the difference between these two processions? The procession toward Nain is the procession of Jesus, full of life and joy, while the procession from Nain to the tomb is the procession of a funeral, full of despair and sorrow. However, these two processions met each other head-on. The important question is, which procession did we originally belong to? As mentioned earlier, we were those who followed the bier in the funeral procession of death and wept. However, on the way to the tomb, we met the procession of Jesus, and what was the result? Verse 16 says, They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. This means that those who were mourning in the funeral procession until now have changed their places to the Jesus procession. Even today, these two kinds of processions still exist in this world. Many people in this world live in various ways, but they ultimately belong to one of the two kinds of processions and walk. Which of these two processions have you belonged to, and where are you walking to? Are you walking toward salvation and life in the Jesus procession? Are you walking toward death and judgment in the funeral procession? If you are still in the funeral procession, quickly change your place to the Jesus procession. Jesus comes to you now, sees you, has compassion on you, touches you, and says, Get up. Therefore, immediately believe in Jesus who died on the cross and was resurrected to solve the problem of your sin and death, and enter the procession that follows him. And become a disciple who follows him and live for eternal values that will not soon disappear. Then, your Nain, which was filled with sorrow and despair, will be filled with joy and gratitude. Therefore, I pray in the name of the Lord that you and I will immediately change the direction of our lives from the funeral procession to the Jesus procession. Amen.